Before all of that, we are joined by David Teel of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, talking some big picture Virginia football. David Teel, 14-time Virginia Sportswriter of the Year and Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. But if you looked at his bio on the Richmond Times-Dispatch, it just says sportswriter. A little humble. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing great, guys. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to have you to talk a little JMU-UVA and big picture. And I was curious, David, your perspective. You attended JMU, what it sort of means for JMU fans, UVA fans to have this matchup back after 4 decades.
Well, for JMU, like you mentioned, Bennett, 40 years in the making. And it's interesting. I talked to Jeff Bourne a couple of weeks ago about the difficulty he has in scheduling Power 5 opponents, even on the road. The Dukes have become prisoners of their own success. And last season's 8-3 debut at the FBS level did not help his cause because folks don't want to play him, and they certainly don't want to come to Harrisonburg.
Yeah, disappointing for JMU fans, but that certainly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and what does it mean heading into this game? Big, huge picture. We're going to take kind of the universe view of this looking down. JMU-UVA, what does this mean for Virginia football, collegiate football in Virginia, and how JMU may be able to schedule moving forward?
Well, I think it's a large game for both programs. I mean, gosh, what is it, 50-some miles over the mountain? And it's a game that I would hope would be played more frequently. That's up to Carla Williams and Jeff to get straight, and I'm sure the coaches would have to say. But it's a risky game for UVA. I mean, here they are, struggling. And Tony Elliott's trying to get his legs underneath him with his program in his second year, and here comes a very ambitious, very accomplished Sun Belt Conference program. It's a tough needle to thread for UVA. And then, of course, guys, you add the just immeasurable emotions that accompany Saturday and the first game at Scott Stadium since November.
What are you expecting from that in terms of the emotions, from what you've heard from the Virginia players and coaches, in terms of how they'll manage that, in terms of obviously going through the pregame ceremony, all that, and then also wanting to win a football game?
Bennett, it's a fascinating question, and one I thought Tony Elliott addressed rather deftly yesterday, talking about different buckets. And you put some of your energy into this bucket, which is the ceremony, and then it's essentially compartmentalizing. And easier said than done, I would think. I've never tried. Number one, I was a terrible athlete, but I can't imagine performing in front of 50,000 plus people, given all the pathos that will be, I would think, overwhelming on Saturday. It's and I think it's completely unpredictable. In many regards, I think it could be inspirational. In others, I think it could be paralyzing almost.
Yeah, so with that game on Saturday, if JMU wins, how can that impact kind of the landscape? And if UVA wins, does that just return things to the status quo, or how does this game kind of shake things up across the state?
Well, guys, if you go back to JMU's other Power 5 conquest of Virginia Tech, that turned out to be, by JMU standards, almost a terrible season.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? I mean, how crazy is that? And a great season for Virginia Tech.
Right.
The Hokies then run the table all the way to the Orange Bowl against Andrew Luck and Stanford, win the ACC, and JMU doesn't even make the playoffs. It's crazy. So, you know, we do want to look at it from 10,000 feet, but I'm not sure what a JMU victory would mean just in terms of the rest of the season. You know, how would they then, you know, they got to follow this up. They got to go to Utah State, and then they have to go to Troy, which may be their most difficult game of the season. You're talking about the reigning conference champions.
Yeah. And then you welcome in South Alabama. It doesn't get much easier after that. And arguably the Sun Belt, that is an insane gauntlet. And this could end up being, not to step on Bennett's toes before he was about to ask a question, but this could end up being a win for JMU and then go on to be maybe a season to forget outside of the UVA win, kind of like men's basketball a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that men's basketball win was quickly dampened. The CAA ruling and sort of a tough conference schedule there didn't make that easy at all. Yeah, I was curious too from UVA's view. I've heard some fans that have maybe not a make or break game, but a tough schedule for them after this one with Maryland the following week, and then Brennan Armstrong returns with NC State. Is this sort of a game where if you're Virginia, it's one of maybe the handful that you really think you can get?
Ben, I think so. You know, if the Cavaliers were to lose Saturday, you know, 0-4 looks, if not likely, certainly very possible. And then you just fear it gets away from you completely and the loss of confidence. And because we haven't even talked about the injury factor. I mean, where is Virginia with Tony Muskett in that left shoulder? And does Chico Bennett make it back to bring that rush off the edge? You know, those are two very large questions that we don't have an answer to and may not have until just before kickoff.
Yeah, those are big ones for sure.
And on Saturday, I don't know if you kind of have an expectation of how that stadium will fill out. I know JMU fans expect a large JMU contingent to make that 50 some odd mile jaunt over the mountain. Contingencies in Northern Virginia, Richmond, all planning to make that trek to Scott Stadium. Do you expect it to be a rather JMU leaning crowd? Is there kind of any expectation from you in terms of what the crowd makeup will be?
I don't know that I would go that far in terms of JMU leaning. And I think Virginia folks will turn out as well. It's a tricky spot, though, if you're the visiting fan, right?
Yeah.
No, given everything
Yes.
that's going on. And I thought Jeff Bourne did a really sharp job today with his message to the Dukes fan base about, yes, we need you in the stands. Yes, we need you rooting for us. But we really need to respect what's going on. And, you know, my understanding is there'll be a lot of orange ribbons, even on the purple gear from JMU fans, which is absolutely appropriate and I think very kind.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the game's exciting for everyone, and obviously there's the big picture there with what Virginia went through last year. Switching gears a little bit, I was curious. Brent Pry had the offseason comment for Virginia Tech being the flagship program in the state. I'm curious how you view. I think when JMU fans look at the flagship school in the state, they might put Liberty and ODU aside and sort of compare themselves to Virginia Tech and Virginia. How do you see those two programs? They've got second-year head coaches, I guess, progressing against each other with UVA and Virginia Tech. Does it look like the Hokies are a bit ahead at this point? How's Tony Elliott's rebuild going with UVA?
It does look to me, Bennett, like Virginia Tech is ahead of Virginia. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that 7 plus years ago, Bronco Mendenhall and Justin Fuente were both first-year coaches at those respective schools. And then Mendenhall and Fuente exit simultaneously, replaced by Brent Pry and Tony Elliott. So here both programs have a reboot at the same time. And I think Tech did a better job in the portal over the offseason, especially in that receiver room. They have really upgraded there. It was evident Saturday against Old Dominion. They're a long ways away now. Don't get me wrong, but I do believe that they're ahead of UVA at this point.
That makes sense. We mentioned that it's been a while. I want to say you were at the Breeze. I think either when some of the previous meetings occurred or right around that time. What can you recall, I guess, about those previous JMU and UVA meetings and sort of how the two programs and fan bases have maybe developed over the last few decades?
Well, they played after I graduated.
Gotcha.
If memory serves, because I graduated in '81, so '80 was my last football season as a JMU student and a member of the Breeze staff. Now, man, the '82 game, I was not there, but obviously heard about it very quickly, without social media, without cell phones. But Gary Clark's two return touchdowns, and still to this day live in JMU lore. And it was a very rough start to George Welsh's coaching tenure. And of course, he ends up being a Hall of Famer, and probably was even before he set foot on grounds, because he had done so well at Navy previously. And very reminiscent of Bronco Mendenhall's first game as Virginia coach when they got spanked by Richmond. And then he, of course, went on to turn the program around. So even if James Madison wins Saturday, I would encourage Virginia fans not to get too down too quickly on Tony Elliott and his staff, and to give them a little bit of a chance.
Yeah, especially if you've got Musket unable to go. That's a tough spot to be in if you got Calandria.
Right, and with Jay Woolfolk off playing baseball,
right,
and you're left with the true freshman Anthony Calandria.
Yeah, interesting quarterback matchup on both sides with the Dukes bench.
Right, yeah. You guys are far more plugged in than I am. That was one short leash that Signetti had on Alonzo Barnett, right?
It was quick. I think he compared it afterward to a golfer with the yips, essentially, where he just couldn't make any throws even when the guys were wide open. Well,
and I guess it was trending. It was trending that way throughout preseason camp. But as successful as the program and Signetti have been with transfer quarterbacks, with experienced quarterbacks, I think we all 6 months ago, if made to project, would have said McLeod starts, right?
I think even 6 weeks ago we would have.
Okay.
Like up until maybe the second week of fall camp, I was fully in on McLeod. And then as reports started coming out, and then of course when Signetti makes that announcement and everything, I was kind of shocked.
Yeah, it was a surprise. I think his final game at South Florida a couple of years back, he threw for like 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against UCF. So McLeod certainly seemed like a guy who would make sense, but I guess they like Barnett's talent, but if it didn't translate against Bucknell, so a quick change indeed.
Yeah, and McLeod was effective. What was he, 7 for 11 and threw the deep touchdown pass to Reggie Brown?
Yeah. Sounds like he, I guess, doesn't show it in practice always, which is another very interesting dynamic. But
right, because how do you, as a coach, preach to your team? You must practice well to earn your starting job, and then have your QB1, stink it up in practice. But we're running him out there on game day because, boys, on Saturday he's a baller.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And then I think Jack and I are both interested because he said Barnett was getting first team reps in camp since the second day. So their starter against UVA was essentially with the second team for all of camp. I don't know exactly what the chemistry will look like with those first team receivers, but we'll find out on Saturday.
We will. And I think JMU is going to try to run it repeatedly.
It's going to be a slog. It's going to be a slog against that defensive line. But David, thank you so much for taking the time out of your night and chatting some JMU-UVA football, some Virginia football. I know we appreciate it a ton.
Guys, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.